Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ken Konecki. I'm usually a resident of the 8:30 service. And if you think it's odd sitting in a different part of the church, try going to a different service. So today I want to talk about, well, being human. I used to have a sign on my desk that read, "To err is human, but to really foul things up requires a computer." As someone whose profession is computers, I can unequivocally tell you that that's true. I'm human, and I err, sometimes a lot. Have you ever gotten philosophical about what it means to be human? I do, especially when I'm on the internet clicking those little squares of crosswalks. Seems to me there's got to be more about proving our humanity than identifying traffic lights and fire hydrants in order to buy tickets to a ball game. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is from the 11th chapter from the Gospel of John. It's only 2 words long, but that's not why it's my favorite. The verse simply says, Jesus wept. You see, Jesus had just returned to Bethany 4 days after hearing about his friend Lazarus' death. When he arrived, Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, met him outside, both of them weeping and saying, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Seeing their grief and feeling their pain, Jesus was deeply moved, and he too cried. Jesus wept. Those 2 words say to me more than anything else that Jesus was above all human. And I think it's fair to say that in the stories of the miracles and the healings, it's easy for us to overlook the fact that Jesus was human, just like us. He ate, he drank, and he got mad at his disciples for being thick-headed. And sometimes he just needed to be alone. And he liked a good party. We know this because his detractors called him a glutton and a drunkard. Sometimes we can learn more about a person from what their opponents say than what their friends do. So yeah, he ate, he drank, he had bad hair days, just like us. He got angry, he got frustrated, and sometimes he felt helpless. And he had compassion, so much so that he cried with Mary and Martha over the loss of their brother and his friend. Have you ever thought about the people we learned about from our history books? You know, we learn about their deeds and the things they did to make a difference in the world, but we rarely, if ever, stop and consider that they were human, just like us, just like Jesus. They ate, they drank, and they breathed. They laughed, and they cried. And if they were anything at all like me, they felt absolute terror when standing in front of a crowd giving a speech. Sometimes we need a simple reminder of their humanness to bring them down from the lofty pedestals we put them on. Facts like George Washington had false teeth. William Shakespeare suffered from insomnia. And Walt Disney of all people, was afraid of mice. It's true. And then there's Martin Luther. Other than starting the Reformation, his day-to-day life was probably no different than yours and mine. He ate when he was hungry, he slept when he was tired, and he had a very human way of fending off the devil. He describes it this way: "Almost every night when I wake up, I instantly chase him away with a fart." I think we could all relate. How many times has Don worked that word into a sermon, right? But here's the thing about being human. Just like I told the kids, we're all unique, just like everyone else. One of the things that makes us unique is that each of us have our own way of experiencing the same event. We can watch the same movie, read the same book, drink the same wine, and we'll all remember them differently. And that's what makes the game of telephone so fun and so interesting. You know the game, right? You line up a group of people, say a phrase in the first person's ear, they repeat it to the next person, and so on and so on. And then the last person says what they heard out loud. And by the time it gets to the last person, it's almost, but not quite, entirely unlike what it started with. You can start with something like, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And end up with, I do not like them, Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham. Each person processed what they heard in their own unique and special way. Jesus wept. Beyond showing his feelings of compassion and grief, these two words show his courage, the courage to feel vulnerable. Vulnerability is emotion we experience in times of risk and emotional exposure. And vulnerability is uncomfortable because we've been conditioned to believe that vulnerability is a weakness. For men especially, the only time we're allowed to cry, the only time we're allowed to feel vulnerable, is when the home team loses. And there's a reason why George Will said Cub fans are 90% scar tissue. Being vulnerable means being open to hurt. But here's the thing. We can't love one another without courage, because there is no courage without vulnerability. As much as anything else, the parable of the Good Samaritan is about love and courage. If you remember, Jesus told this story in answer to the question, who is my neighbor? There's a couple of things that make the story so forceful for me. The obvious one, of course, is that the victim of a robbery, left on the road naked and half dead, was helped out by a foreigner. But in Jesus' time, that foreigner was more than just a person from a different country. People from Samaria were reviled by the Jews. They wholly thought of Samaritans as non-human, despite essentially sharing a common heritage and religion. John chapter 4, verse 9 puts it like this: the Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. Another thing to keep in mind is that the people who avoided the naked, bleeding man were a Hebrew priest and a Levite, both of whom were essentially clergy. The Samaritan helped the naked man despite his nakedness, which was religiously offensive to the priest and to Levite. He helped him despite the man's self-evident poverty, knowing that he wouldn't be paid back for his efforts. And he helped him despite whichever Hebrew sect he belonged to. So here we have a story told to a Jew about a person reviled by Jews who had the courage to help someone when two Jewish clergy went out of their way to avoid him. The Samaritan was the one who showed him love to the injured man. He embraced his own vulnerability with courage to do something daring. Jesus wept. He wept because he had the courage to face his vulnerability. He wept because he loved. And because he loved, he changed the world. He wept because he was human. And because we're human too, we can change the world just like he did. With love and compassion and the courage to embrace our own vulnerability. To err is human, but so is to love. And that's something a computer can't foul up. Please rise as you are able for the creed.